people used to ask me, how do I work with Richard? Because he's just got this sort of fire hose of ideas.
A not to-do list is far more important than a to-do list.
The one thing not to say to Richard is no. Big example of something we put on a not to-do list actually was Australia.
Hello and welcome to How to Make a Billion in 9 Steps with Richard Harpin, where we explore how to build a successful business. I'm Graham Ruddick and I'm delighted to be joined by Richard, and for this episode, Jonathan King. Jonathan joined Homeserve in 2000 and went on to become one of the very key figures within the business. He was UK Managing Director, Chief Executive of Homeserve USA, and is now Homeserve Japan Chairman as part of a portfolio career. In this episode, we're going to be looking at 3 more of the steps that Richard has identified as pivotal for building a business. Those 3 steps are evolution, not revolution, follow a not to-do list, and hone your character. So with that, Richard, please could you talk us through evolution, not revolution?
Thanks, Graham, and great to have you here, Jonathan. And I thought maybe as a starting point, it would be really good of you to share your Homeserve journey and how you came to join Homeserve in the first place.
Sure. I actually tell this story a lot, Richard, because at Homeserve Japan, every time a new senior manager joins, I do a little session called the Homeserve University, Homeserve 101. It takes 2 hours. And I always start with the same anecdote, which is how I met you. And we met at a mutual friend's 40th birthday party. And we just started talking because I think we were the 2 boring guys in the corner of the room. And you started telling me about the business that you had as a joint venture at that time with South Staffordshire Water. And the more I listened, the more I thought, what a fantastic sounding business. And I still remember 3 things that I came away from that chance meeting at a social event with, and I talk about them as the most important things still today about the Homeserve membership businesses. And they are, the first thing, and probably the most important, is that Homeserve did then and still fulfills a genuinely unmet customer need, which is helping customers, often older, more vulnerable people, find help in a home emergency, whether it's a plumbing emergency or heating, air conditioning, or electrical wiring. And that's still true today as it ever was. And unmet customer needs are not that easy to find these days, but Homeserve meets one. The second thing I remember is the really smart approach to branding. So rather than spend a whole load of money trying to build up a Homeserve brand, why not work with brands that customers already recognize and trust? And that is, in the case of Homeserve, most often utilities. In the case of Homeserve UK, it was water companies, but now across the world, it's power companies, gas companies. And still today, I brought with me today some examples of Homeserve marketing in Japan, and still on a letter to a customer here. This happens to be directly to me. You'll see an envelope with the logo of a well-known Japanese utility on the bottom, and that's one of our partners. We still pursue the same approach in Japan. So really smart approach to marketing, working with brands customers recognize already. And then the third really cool thing, which is still true today, is that Homeserve is a subscription business. And subscriptions pretty trendy these days, and they weren't really quite as fashionable, 25 years ago. But again, it's true today that the robust revenue streams that you get and reliable revenue that you get from a subscription business gives you an unbeatable model, and the way the flywheel starts turning when you build up a portfolio of customers is unrivaled. So I remember those 3 things, and one thing led to another, and I joined Homeserve a few months later. Your joke is always that you couldn't afford me. I think that actually that was not really true, but just waiting for the right time, and I was very eager to join. And I could never have imagined in those days that joining a small joint venture with a Midlands water company would have ended up as a multinational business of multi-billion pound market capitalization. It gave me personally a fantastic career that I'm still enjoying, albeit on a part-time basis. And we've helped a whole load of people in home emergencies along the way in many, many countries. So it's been enormously satisfying.
And great, Jonathan, that you're still in Homeserve after 25 years. And got to say, you don't look old enough. You must have started your career there aged about 15. Let's move on to my step number 7, and that is evolution, not revolution. And there is a role for revolution, and that's right at the beginning of a business when testing and proving out the model, copying, pivoting, and hopefully coming up with something that is revolutionary, better, slightly different from what somebody else has done. But thereafter, I'd say that revolution is really dangerous. It's 2 steps removed from the core business, and that can lead to disaster. And equally, if a business is not evolving year after year after year, then that can be equally dangerous. And we all know those companies like Blockbuster Video, Nokia mobile phones, Yellow Pages is a shadow of its former self. Great examples of business that didn't keep evolving. There's another one, and that is Apple. And let's just cast our minds back to 2012 when, unfortunately, Steve Jobs died. And can we all remember what shareholders were saying at the time? Oh, we're really worried that Apple is not going to come up with a revolutionary new product now that Steve has died. At the time, Apple was worth $300 billion. And the answer is they haven't come up with a revolutionary new product. So AirPods, Apple Watches, it's been Apple Pay, Apple Music, Apple Store, cloud services, and many evolutions, but not revolution. So that shows that if you look at the market cap now of Apple today, before the Trump tariffs, was over $3 trillion. And that shows that evolution is what develops the real value.
Richard, how do you think the best way is to organize a business to make sure that most people, most of the time, are focused on the evolution? Because I agree with you, but the problem can be evolution can be a bit of a grind, and revolution's fun, isn't it? Because it's always about new things, and new things are always successful. Do you just give everybody a little bit of revolution to do, or do you set up a group of people whose job it is to do the revolting?
Yeah, I think it can probably work in 2 ways, can't it? I think hopefully people in a business will be prompted either by the colleagues to come up with, how can we just develop the service a bit better? Could we develop the product range beyond plumbing insurance cover into electrics and boiler breakdown cover and those other products? And those would definitely be evolution. I think maybe on occasions a big company might think we've got to sort of get more focused on innovation. And we did do that in Homeserve in 2013. We brought on board a guy called Greg Jackson. He set up the shed at the end of the garden, which was actually an office in King's Cross that 12 years later is my London office today. But the objective there was to say, let's put innovation a bit higher on the agenda and see what else we can come up with. But hopefully the things that worked were the things that were evolutions, like going from boiler breakdown cover to working out how we could do boiler installations, rather than radical things like getting into smart home devices as part of the core business.
And that's the danger with revolution. Sometimes we're going to come on to the topic of the not to-do list, aren't we? But it's the danger. How do you focus your revolution so that people just don't get distracted and end up with too many things on their plate?
Yes. Perhaps come back to that. I guess if you cast your mind back to that day that you went from being business development director in Homeserve UK to effectively taking over from me as the UK chief exec of Homeserve. How did you make sure that you did evolution rather than revolution?
I remember that was one of the most, I've had lots of fun times in Homeserve, but that was one of the most fun times. And I had the joy of having a business model that was absolutely flying at the time, Richard. So what I took over was just working so well that for me it was an enormous pleasure just to implement it and to do it well. I had a team of people who also wanted to do the same thing, actually, and we're not easily distracted from that. They really just wanted to make the thing work. We had lots of opportunities to make the marketing work better. The customers really wanted the product. The partners were really supportive. One of my most memorable times actually was we had a marketing director called Jeff Love, a great guy, and I remember we had our financial year at that time was April through to March, and around about February, I remember being called to Brian Whitty's office. Brian Whitty was our chairman at the time, Graham, and he said, "Oh, bring the marketing director as well." So I thought, "Oh gosh, what have we done?" So we went over to Brian Whitty's office and sat down and said, "Guys, can you just slow down a bit? Because it's all doing too well and it's all going to get a bit embarrassing. Because how on earth are we going to do even better than this next year?" So nice problem to have. And so at that time, Richard, it wasn't. I think one of the things I can do is be focused, and I preach a lot of focus to the teams that I'm responsible for now in Homeserve Japan, and I'm very conscious that human nature does tend to be distracted by newness and new things. But I've been in the lucky position of I'm very motivated by results.
Somebody else, Jonathan, coming in and doing that job that you did, taking over from me, might have felt, if they'd been a high ego sort of character, might have said, "Oh, we're not satisfied with the current model that's working really well. We want to change it. We want to come up with our own ideas." So it's a tribute to you that you didn't, and you said, "Well, actually, it's working really well, so let's just do more of the same."
What I inherited was just such a fantastic thing, and still is. And even now, you've sort of stepped away largely from the Homeserve EMEA team, but even now, 20 years later, I tend to be in that group, the one who sort of preaches focus and just remembering what got us here, and remembering what still makes us lots of money.
But what about sort of working with me? And I was the one with lots of ideas, many of which didn't work, and they were probably more revolution than evolution. And perhaps one or two examples where you saw that we were moving too far away from our fantastic membership model.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have always got along very well. So I never really, found it a particular challenge. And when people used to ask me, how do I work with Richard, because he's just got this sort of fire hose of ideas, I would always say, well, that's what it is, and Richard understands that as well. I think the thing that I remember you and I once having a conversation where I said, please just remember, Richard, that the problem with your fire hose of ideas is that junior people take them as instructions. And if there ever was any difficulty, it's kind of sometimes I would find people kind of doing stuff. So what are you doing that for? And they said, well, Richard told us to, and you didn't really. But it was just another of your ideas. I mean, you've always acknowledged that not all of your ideas are good ones, but you are lucky enough that quite a lot of them are. And so I, when you're a manager like me, working for an entrepreneurial character like you do realize quite quickly that one of the skills that you have to have is acting as a filter for your team. and figuring out between you and me, which are the things that we are going to do and which are the things that, frankly, just don't seem to be a terribly good idea or won't work at the time or whatever. But I always found that kind of worked okay, really. And
Yeah,
I'd much rather have that than no ideas at all.
Yeah, and I think the key is to say, good idea, but let's park that because we've got a list of priorities, and maybe we'll come back to that one day, and we'll stick it in the ideas bucket. But the key bit, and I think what you were really, really good at was saying, we've got our priorities, we've got our model, and let's just stick to doing that, while not forgetting that we need to come up with new products, that as an overall business in Homeserve, we need to start thinking about would Homeserve work in a foreign country one day?
I mean, the advice I always used to give to people in terms of, people used to say to me, how do I deal with Richard? And I said, the one thing not to say to Richard is no, or that, you can't do that, because that just used to drive you crazy and probably still does. And then the other most important thing in working with an entrepreneur like Richard is it's okay not to do exactly what Richard wants, but you've got to be doing something else, and you've got to be able to defend it as a better idea right now than the worst thing you can ever do in Homeserve. The biggest crime in Homeserve is doing nothing. I actually said that to somebody in an interview about half an hour ago.
So that was evolution, not revolution. Thank you for your thoughts, Richard, and for Jonathan. Richard, talk to us about follow a not to-do list, which Jonathan touched on there, and its importance.
Yeah, that's my step number 8. And I think if we had a show of hands, then almost everybody would say, I have a to-do list, because a business is about getting stuff done. It's about the execution, and everybody needs a way of keeping track of the stuff that they need to do. But then if you had a show of hands and said, how many people have got a not to-do list, it would be very few. And I'm arguing here that a not to-do list is far more important than a to-do list. And I cast my mind back to February 2020. 3 weeks before the whole of the world was locked down in COVID. And I was lucky enough to go and spend 2 days with my American Homeserve chief exec, Tom Rusin, with Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great. And I've been a big admirer of him. I first read the book in 2003. And I think, Jonathan, we over the years have sort of introduced Good to Great the Homeserve way. Yeah. And I really wanted to find out firsthand how we could spin the flywheel and finally turn Homeserve from a good company into one that was great. So I'd contacted Jim, managed to get him to give us 2 places on his chief exec's retreat in his laboratory in Boulder, Colorado. And we arrived there, and Jim Collins was over at the other side of his meeting room talking away, and I was sitting next to Jack. Jack was 76 years old, a multi-billionaire Australian, and he was still there with an appetite to learn. And Jim was talking away. Jack reached across in my ear, and he said, do you know what, Richard? What Jim is telling us is we're foxes. We're always looking for the next opportunity. And he's telling us we need to be hedgehogs. That when somebody comes along with a harebrained idea, we put up our prickles, we ignore that idea, and we keep going in a methodical direction. And it was a really powerful message, even to Jack, who owned Domino's Pizza in Australia and also owns Burger King. And do you know what Burger King is called in Australia? Hungry Jack's, after Jack that was sitting next to me sharing that anecdote, and we were both learning from Jim Collins. But it was a very powerful message. And what Jim said is, ask yourselves and your teams, if you haven't done this, 3 questions. First of all, what are you passionate about in your business? And that will normally be your purpose. Secondly, what can you be the best at? What's your USP? Even if you've copied a competitor, what's the bit that can then make it even better? Why will people buy your product or service? And then thirdly, what's your economic engine? How are you going to make money? And what you need to do is put the answer to those 3 questions together in one sentence of no more than 20 words.
I think the other concept, which is it's an obvious one, but is overlooked really, is just the idea that management resource and time is not infinite. Even for somebody like Richard, who crams more into his day than most people cram into the week, there's still a finite resource, and so there's a really important notion of opportunity cost in business, and that by doing things that should be on your not to do list is taking away focus and time from the things that you should be doing. When I was just thinking about the podcast, Richard, the best big example of something we put on a not to do list actually was Australia, thinking about your friend Jack. And Homeserve's business in Australia, for various reasons, probably can't go into too long to go into now, but didn't work, unfortunately. But I thought that Homeserve, and I was involved in that, and Richard and the board went through a really good decision-making process to say, is it worth carrying on? And in the end, we said, it's a relatively small country. The marketing isn't working as well as we wanted to. The costs of operation are actually a bit higher than we thought that they would be. Apart from the size of the country, all of those things probably could have been fixed with a huge amount of effort and a lot of focus. But at the same time, we had the business in the United States, which was going absolutely gangbusters. So there was management time, there was capital, and there was just focus that could be much better used by putting it into this huge business that I'm sitting in today, rather than trying to turn Australia from a failure into a small, moderate success. And so I think that's the best thing that ever went on my not to do list, Richard.
But it takes courage to do that, doesn't it? To say, stop and let's put that extra resource into America, which is a big opportunity. And even I think back to the marketing teams where they were developing new direct mail testing ideas. How do people still want to say, well, that didn't quite work, and we want to get to a new target group of customers, and these are younger, happy families, and we've got to find a way to get to them and get them to sign up to our Home Assistance membership. How do you get people to say, well, actually, we tested it, it didn't work, so let's say stop and let's move on to something else?
By saying just that, I think. I think you do have to give people the opportunity to test and to try and as you, I'm sure, know, with me and with other people as well. Sometimes you do have to let people make some of the mistakes, even when you know that something almost certainly isn't going to work. But most of the time, that's your job as a manager, isn't it? Actually, sometimes just to put your foot down and say, no, we are going to focus on what does work. I have I have the same things to contend with in Japan right now with my team, where one of the reasons the Japanese market is so good for Homeserve is that it's an aging population. And there are larger and larger numbers of older people who really benefit from our service. But from time to time, someone either in our marketing team or an advisor or whatever says, oh, no, we've got to sell to younger people. And my answer is, well, why? There are 35 million, and you do it with data, there are 35 million people over the age of 60 in Japan. and we've only sold so far to 250,000 of them. There are a lot more to go at before we start. So let's sell to the people who really, really want and appreciate our product before we start trying to sell to the people who don't.
Absolutely right. And I remember, and reinforces the importance of having a really strong chairman in a business, was I really wanted to up the ante in international development and looked at both Brazil and India. But those are really, really difficult countries. But I thought, well, that's why we need to conquer them, and we'll find a way of being successful. And it took our chairman at the time, didn't it, Barry Gibson, to say, come off it. Those are really difficult. There's a good chance of failure. And wouldn't we be better to put our finite amount of management resource and investment into doing even more in the countries in which we're already in, or to expand Spain into Portugal, expand France into near neighbour of Belgium.
How much of it, Richard, comes down to incentives as well? Because I do believe people respond to incentives, and I come back again to what I said earlier in the podcast about the challenges that new stuff just tends to be sexy and exciting, and old stuff and just keeping grinding away at the old stuff. I find it very satisfying, but for many it feels less fun and a less satisfying career. How do you incentivize people and keep their jobs fresh, despite the fact that you're saying just keep doing the same thing because it's working?
I think it's designing a incentive program, isn't it? A bonus that focuses on what are the key performance indicators that are the ones that are really going to deliver the value for shareholders. And let's make sure everybody is focused on those, not on the shiny new stuff that is high risk, is going to divert from just growing the core business. And there's an example that I cite. There aren't many founders that are hedgehogs, but there's a guy in the UK, Simon Aurora. He wasn't quite the founder of B&M, the discount store chain, but he bought it for £500,000, turned it into a business worth 5 billion over 17 or 18 years. And I met up with him and said, what was the key to driving that level of value? And he said, telling people to stop doing stuff and complicating the model. We're a business that sells well-known brands like Fairy Liquid and Cadbury's chocolate at low prices to people on a budget. And when they're in store, they buy an impulse gardening product or homewares product. And that's where we make our money. That's our model. And all we need to do is open more stores. We keep hiring loads of people and they try and complicate the model. Is that fair, do you think? Was there any experience of that within Homeserve over your time?
No, I think that is fair, and in a way, it's an increasing challenge, because if I, again, take the example of the business in Japan, where we grew about 100% last year, and we'll grow another 60% in customer numbers this year. We still recruit most of our customers through the direct mail, like the piece of mail I showed earlier. And I think we do have to be conscious that trying to attract quality management into the business, that's not necessarily the most attractive thing for them. And people are, as well as wanting to come to Homeserve to be sort of financially and professionally successful, people are also trying to build careers. So we do have to provide them a management experience and career development that does develop them, and isn't just serving the short or medium term needs of the business, but which is actually helping them develop their careers as well. I hope they do, but it's sometimes difficult to tell a 25-year-old person that their future is in sending out 12 million pieces of mail every year.
And I guess finally on this topic, how can we encourage people running medium-sized businesses that aspire to be the next Homeserve How can we encourage them to have a not to do list? What do they need to do you think, with their teams, in your experience?
I mean, I think things like this podcast really help, I hope. And I hope a lot of people will listen to it and take notice. And it's something that you've talked about for many years. I think the challenge is to ignore that there's a concept called survivorship bias, isn't there? Where a lot of business news tends to focus on people who have done new, groundbreaking things. Where actually a lot of the unsung heroes of business and all over the world, I'm sure it's true in Britain as well, are the people who just keep grinding away at really good businesses that serve a great customer need and don't actually need to change all that much to be very successful.
So we need to celebrate the hedgehog, not the
Yes. Exactly right. Yeah.
So that was following a not to do list. I learned so much just from listening to you both talk there. That was incredible insights. Richard, that brings us on to the 9th and final step: hone your character.
This is the one that I forgot about originally. This is the personal characteristics of the founder entrepreneur. And originally I had 8 steps and not 9. But this one's really important, and I think it's those some horrible characteristics of entrepreneurs, some really good ones, but it's about that persistence, courage. I've called it hone your character because I genuinely believe that you can't change somebody's character. And in performance reviews, everybody goes away saying, oh, I'm going to forget about my strengths and try and focus on my weaknesses. And I'm a big believer that it's much better that we celebrate our strengths, try and hone those even more, and then hire amazing people to do the bits that we can't do. And hence the amazing relationship, Jonathan, that you and I had, where you had many strengths on delivering the day-to-day business, being that chief exec that looked after our customers, got that amazing growth in the businesses that you ran. And it was me looking at how do we grow next as a group, what are the new ideas, how do we grow geographically, thinking about new products. And that was an amazing partnership. And I think Jim Collins would call it level 5 leadership characteristics, working out the things that really matter. And maybe those are a bit different between the entrepreneur and then the fantastic chief exec. And so I guess I don't have many strengths, but the ones I do have are resilience, persistence, courage, ambition. But those alone are not going to be successful if you haven't got your hedgehog. And so I'd love to hear, Jonathan, what are the characteristics that you've got that you really honed that made you so successful in your 25 years in Homeserve?
Well, I mean, the first thing I should say is it's a really important point, I think, Richard, that you said that most of us, certainly, I don't know, beyond the age of 25 or so, don't really change fundamentally. I really, really do believe that. I believe that about myself and about you and almost all the people that I have ever worked with. And I also believe very much in thinking, okay, what is it I'm actually quite good at? And not trying to do the rest, not trying to be, to quote Jim Collins again, the genius with 1,000 helpers, but actually to find people who can fill in the many gaps. And I always say and thought, and this was not always the case in my career, but I've been lucky enough to have it a few times, that when you're leading a team, when you're a CEO of a business or whatever, you look around the table at your team, your direct reports, and you say, every single one of you does your job, the individual job, better than I could myself. That's when you know you've really made it as a chief executive. And so, identifying the right people in the team and bringing them together and filling in your own weaknesses, of which we all have many, is the most important thing. I think a certain amount, though, of I'm not quite sure what the right word is. Sort of ruthlessness is important as well, though, because just going back to the point about do people change or not? Not very much. It's also being able to identify people where it's not working out, there's the wrong person in the wrong job, and take swift action. Something I've been personally terrible at over the years, by the way, and I don't think it's even been your particular huge strength, has it, Richard? You know, you and I can probably think of one or two people we both kept going longer than we probably should have done.
And so I think, looking back, we'd both say you've got to have those tough conversations with people earlier, and actually they could be really successful in a different organization, but it's not the one that we're running. What would you, so if you sort of gave that advice to entrepreneurs that are running mid-sized businesses, or the chief execs that are the hedgehogs for those medium-sized businesses, then how should they do it, and what's your advice to them?
One of the things I always say, one of the things that characterizes a successful Homeserve person, and I suspect this would be true at least for a lot of mid-sized businesses as well, is when you're going out looking for people, it's quite easy to find people relatively easy to find people who are doers. And it's relatively easy to find people who are thinkers, particularly if you're recruiting sort of smart people from big companies. But there's a sort of Venn diagram where those two things kind of cross over, and there's a little group in between. And I don't think it's all that big, of people who think and do, and want to do both. And those are the people. I do believe that I'm lucky enough to fall into that category, that you do as well. And I think that's probably why my career at Homeserve has been so long, because I was able to think, but I was super happy to do as well. Just as an example, Graham, it was not unusual, and I didn't mind at all, by the way, for Richard not only to have amazing big ideas about the long-term strategy for the business, but to come into my office in Walsall with a direct mail pack that he designed overnight, done in his own handwriting, and so you've got a culture in the business that says we think, but we also do, and we are also really into the detail, and that's something again that I try to really hard to recruit for, but it's not easy. World tends to fall into thinkers and doers, either by skill or by preference. I'm not sure.
And how do you find them at interview? And because I agree, that's the magic model, but anybody can say anything at interview, can't they? How do you do a process that genuinely finds great people like that?
Yeah, well, it's surprising how easily people reveal themselves. Actually, I mean, not using tricks at all. But if you, we typically ask people joining us to, after we've kind of figured out that they look reasonably competent and the sort of people we'd want to hire, we ask them to do a presentation. And one of the things I've asked for years and years is just tell me what you want to have achieved after a month, after 6 months, after a year, and maybe after 2 years, something like that. And it's the doers who will say after a year are still researching the market. Sorry, it's the thinkers who are still after a year are still saying, well, I'll be researching the market and developing the strategy and so on. And it's the people in the middle who not only say, I'll just have a quick look at the strategy to make sure I understand it and I think it works, and then we'll tell you exactly what they're going to achieve in 3 months or 6 months or other. So you can figure it out. You don't always get it right, of course, and I've made plenty of mistakes. One of the challenges that I remember finding in Homeserve in recruitment is that as people rise successfully, particularly through bigger organizations, they tend to be asked to and prefer to do work which is, if you like, more strategic rather than actually getting up in the morning and designing a bit of marketing.
Yeah, I always say that what we want is medium company people, not big company people, because big company people hire a load of other people to do the work, or they bring in a raft of management consultants, when actually you want to have somebody that has that entrepreneurial cultural fit and is a small company type person, because where you hire somebody, it doesn't work out. Normally, it will be because there's not the right cultural fit. Is that
totally
fair?
Yeah, we went. I'm sure you remember. I remember going through quite a long period at Homeserve in the UK, where we hired people who had very successful careers at other companies, came to Homeserve, it didn't work out, and then they went on to have very successful careers elsewhere. So, to some extent, to a large extent, the problem was us there and us not being able to spot the type of personality and the type of character and the cultural fit that would make it work.
Do you think that too many chief execs walk away too soon? I think the average life of a chief exec, certainly for a public company in the UK, is just a bit less than 5 years. I was at Homeserve for 32 years. You're still there after 25 years. And back to our previous step, I think that's a good example of evolution, not revolution. And what do you think?
Yes, I mean, gosh, in many of my jobs, I felt I'd only just got going after 5 years. I mean, I think a lot of that, I'm guessing a lot of that churn that you're talking about is driven by public markets, is it? And shareholders. So it's hard to comment on any of the individual things, but the value of institutional knowledge. And for me now, I'm a chairman, not a chief executive, but for me now, to kind of almost instinctively be able to guide people in the right direction, just because of the knowledge that I'm lucky that I've still got the opportunity to do it. I said to someone the other day, I'm a one-trick pony. All I know how to do is Homeserve management and Homeserve membership management in particular. But certainly, I know a lot more now than I did after 5 years, and a lot more now than I did after 10.
My final question is around on this step number 9, hone your character, is do we need to do something differently in performance reviews? And not just within Homeserve, but particularly sort of a medium-sized business, and how often should they have those performance reviews, and how do we do something that says don't just focus on the weaknesses and the areas for improvement, but what should we be doing differently, do you think, in recommending to medium-sized businesses?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to ask here, because you were almost always very nice in performance reviews. So thank you for that. I always hated giving them and hated having them done to me. And I do wonder whether if you're really clear as a manager what you're expecting from people, and if you've got the right people on board, and if you have enough contact with them on a day-to-day basis, I wonder how necessary they really are. Really, if you're giving people news in a performance review, even if you're doing it more frequently than we used to do, then you've got a problem, haven't you? Because you've got a mismatch of, I'm fairly confident that I never heard anything even vaguely surprising in the reviews that you and I did together. I hope that means that I was reasonably aware of my strengths and equally aware of my weaknesses. But I may not be the best person to ask. And I've got to say that, in my role as chairman, one of the delights of doing my job, Richard and Graham, is I get to do almost all of the things that I really love about work. And then I get to avoid almost all the things that I really never used to like very much. And performance reviews are one of them, both getting them and giving them.
I think what I would say now, with the benefit of experience, is that 1 minute praisings and 1 minute reprimands would work the best. And that if you see something that's been done really well, then you would say, wow, that's fantastic, and praise in public. If there's something, you've just sat in a meeting and there was no clear agenda, no good discussion or outcome, papers hadn't been sent out in advance, and you felt really frustrated, then you call that person into your office and say, really disappointed in that meeting, and here's how I think we could do it better next time, and doing that in private. And that's probably, in a fast-moving world with AI, that's probably the new type of performance review, isn't it?
No, that makes a lot of sense, Richard. Yeah, and definitely things are much better when they're fresh. And there's something kind of vaguely petty, isn't there, about kind of digging up an example like that from 4 months ago in a performance review. You think, why didn't you tell me before?
This has made me feel really nostalgic. The looking back at Homeserve.
I have that impact on people.
I'm still involved in a little way in chairing Checkatrade and eLocal, two of the Homeserve businesses. But you and I working together, Jonathan, was absolutely amazing. It's been great to reminisce, particularly to put that conversation into 3 of the steps of how you build a £1 billion business. So I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. I hope it hasn't been too much of a nostalgia fest, and that the viewers will find it useful.
Richard, Jonathan, thank you very much. You've been listening to How to Make a Billion in 9 Steps with Richard Harpin. You've been listening to How to Make a Billion in 9 Steps with Richard Harpin. Our producer is Lucy McPhee. To find out more about Richard's 9 steps and how to build a successful business, you can find his book, How to Make a Billion in 9 Steps, online at Amazon or any good bookshop now.